Remember, we made a video about polar opposite quakes during a wobble. We actually predicted quakes. We said we are detecting a wobble in the North Star. And as soon as we detected that wobble in the North Star, we made a video about the earthquakes caused by the shifting of the plates. How some part of the Earth would remain relatively still, but other parts of the Earth would be subjected to major changes in motion, which would cause earthquakes. That part of the Earth that has the most motion, the directly opposite of that part of the Earth, is also being subjected to the same motion changes that would create polar opposite quakes. Well, hey, it made it to mainstream. Now, the vaccines are out, and I think there's been some great concerns and a lot of hype about how safe they are. I've had doctors look me in the eye and tell me how safe they are. And I keep reminding them about the polio vaccines and how some of today's vaccines are contaminated with porcine virus. So this is an article about one of those vaccines actually being pulled, and it tells you right here, they call them contaminants. We showed you an FDA article that was put out. We put the video out about a year ago about how before there was a coronavirus, we were making a couple vaccine videos. And we were talking about the contaminants and the FDA admitted it, and they used the word contaminant. But they said, well, your body makes antibodies against those viruses. Those are basic general antiviral antibodies, may offer you protection against a broad range of viruses. So having additional viral particles in that vaccine may give you better immunity. However, when they use the word contaminant, and it comes right out of their mouth, remember, seemingly contradicting statements means what? It means somebody's up to no good when you start getting contradictions, especially out of people who are supposed to be experts and know all about this stuff. So viral vaccines are contaminated, some of them with porcine virus and other viruses. And remember, the polio vaccine killed over 50,000 people, or about 50,000 people. That's a pretty close estimate. So, and that's from what? A contaminant, a virus, the simian virus, SV40. They've proven that the SV40 virus can cause different types of cancers. Not just the 50,000 cases of lymphoma that they've traced it to, but they've found the SV40 virus in other tumors as well. And then we talk about the drugs being cleared through the FDA. We're talking about how Eli Lilly and Regeneron companies are making hundreds of thousands of doses available for the monoclonal antibody. And Trump received the monoclonal antibody, a cocktail of antibodies that can attack viruses and stimulate the immune system. Without a whole lot of evidence, it got approved on an emergency basis. And of course, Eli Lilly and Regeneron went right at making these things. And if you look at the standards and the amount of data available on the monoclonal antibodies is not as voluminous, is not as near as much as the data on chloroquine. The chloroquine data is much more convincing, much more extensive. What more can I say? But where's the problem? It's IV. Same problem as remdesivir. We've told you since the very first day, antiviral products work better early in the infection. Do not wait. And none of this stuff can be given early. It's all given in the hospital. It's all given IV. So who's going to hang your IV at your house? They need to figure out how to get this in the home, because if you want people to survive, and you want to think this is your answer, this monoclonal antibody, you better make sure people can get it. And the problem is, this stuff doesn't work when you're deathly ill. When you're on a respirator and you're already deficient in oxygen, it's not shown to be that effective. So it's even contraindicated. So, so let's make hundreds of thousands. Let's pay for it, and now it's just sitting on the shelves. Do you like that? Remember when we told you that the coronavirus with HIV inserts, there was a patent pending on it. Here's the abstract. I finally came across it, about how good coronaviruses can be for making vaccines. They say first coronaviruses are positive stranded RNA viruses. So positive, I think they mean electromagnetically positive, which is why electrons in negatively charged stuff like oxygen can render that positive charge neutral and keep the virus from attaching. But the positive stranded RNA viruses replicating in the cytoplasm without a DNA intermediary, making insertions of viral sequences into the host cell genome unlikely. That means our genome. So they're trying to say it won't hurt you genetically to get the DNA. Second, coronaviruses have the largest RNA genome known so far, and a cloning capacity of more than 6 kb is expected. That means you can get a lot of replications out of it. Third, coronaviruses display a unique transcription process resulting in the synthesis of 6-8 subgenomic mRNA. So that's pieces of DNA. And by subgenomic, I gotta believe they're talking about fragments. Encoding mainly the structural genes which can be replaced by multiple gene of interests. So they can take off stuff and add stuff to the genetic material of that coronavirus. Fourth, the receptor of the human coronavirus, HCOV229E, is expressed on dendritic cells. So that means your white cells can transfer that code to other white cells. They're expressed on dendritic cells, which then transfer. And the dendritic cells, without them, we wouldn't be here. Fifth, the natural route of coronavirus infections is the mucosal route. The long-term objective of our study is to generate a novel HIV vaccine vector that targets and activates DC displays sufficient cloning capacity for insertion of several HIV antigens. Antigen is what causes your immune system to react. So an HIV antigen and immunostimulatory cytokines. So the things that cytokines stimulate your immune system. Encodes for antigenic, that means things that can stimulate your immune system, determinants that induce broadly neutralizing antibody responses, and 4 can be applied via mucosal surfaces. Interesting. The specific aim of this application is to provide the proof of principle that coronavirus vectors can induce protective antiviral, humoral, and cellular immune responses in vivo. That means in living things. So there you go. There's a big old tons of literature on a coronavirus that is manufactured. And so when a Nobel Prize winning laureate, Lou Montagnier, or Montagnier, whatever, I'm not French, so, but however you pronounce his name, you don't have to be a Nobel Prize winning anybody to see that coronavirus with HIV inserts is manufactured. One of the other things that prove that this is the furin cleaving glycoprotein that causes the coronavirus to bud sometimes prematurely. Those little spores are lighter, they're sticky, they have an electrical charge, and they can be tacky when they're wet. So dry or wet, they can stick to you. Well, that makes it very, very contagious. Those little things you can fit millions of them just inside the crease of your fingertips. So so they talk about this glycoprotein, and the furin cleaving protein is not found in the bat coronavirus. So there's a huge difference between this coronavirus and the one they say comes from a bat. The bat coronavirus, they've concluded, independently verified, does not make furin cleaving glycoprotein. Well, then, where do they get furin from? Well, furin is made naturally in your own bodies. It cleaves our DNA. Our DNA is double stranded. To break the DNA strands and recopy what's on them, you need a cleaving protein, and it's called furin. So it's very common. But it's also found in another virus. It's also found in at least one other virus. Not very common, is it? It's found in what? HIV. More studies talk about the coronavirus is far more likely than SARS to bond to human cells due to HIV, like they want to call it a mutation. Go ahead, call it a mutation. But it's not a mutation, it's a creation. And remember the very first bombshell about there's HIV inserts, and the people who produced that study, Dr. Fauci's biggest concern was it wasn't peer reviewed. Then he lost that concern when he was promoting something he was vested in called remdesivir, which has actually been shown not to even be helpful. So the man tried to promote something that's not even helpful by telling a lie or being absolutely wrong. So, and by violating his own peer review requirements before we accept anything. So, but the Netherlands, they took and they did as gene sequencing themselves. Here's your sequence: AATGGTACTAAGAGG equals HIV1. And there's other amino acid sequences that resemble HIV. So there's your peer review, independently verified by another study. And then and people talk about his announcement that he did in the Oval Office. He got all dressed up for it. Everybody got dressed up for it. Well, when you go to a sales call, you got to look your best. But prior to peer review, he made this announcement, which completely contradicts his real insistence on peer-reviewed stuff. But the remdesivir, I could have told you, anything intravenous that's antiviral is not going to be that helpful. And of course, to his experiment that he did, his study showed that it didn't really change the death rate. So then they said, well, let's don't look at death rate. Let's look at hospital discharge, the length of stay in the hospital. Well, if you die 2 days after your hospital stay, that's a short stay by anybody's standards. But they changed the criteria. They changed what they were actually measuring in order to come up with something that looked positive, and that was how short your hospital stay was. And then they changed how you defined a hospital stay. It wasn't just a discharge. So there we go. And of course, remdesivir stock made by Gilead, it rose after that press conference. I wonder if those guys sold off. Many scientists say about Fauci's little sales call at the Oval Office, they said they were surprised that they weren't briefed. Usually, in medicine, they brief doctors because everybody's looking for truth. Everybody's looking for accuracy. We want safety and efficacy. That's what we want. So, before you open your mouth, you submit it out there. You put it out there. So then when you make your announcement, it can be vetted correctly for the safety of me and you. Then there was a Freedom of Information request. Remember, they came really hard on colloidal silver, not because it hasn't been proven to be antiviral, not because it doesn't work against similar viruses. They said, well, you have to prove it works against this coronavirus. And even though we have a new strain, they're saying, hey, that new strain is, that the vaccine will take care of it. I mean, how would you know? You tested the vaccine on the old strains. But anyways, the FDA, Freedom of Information Act, do you have any documentation that silver has hurt anybody? And they wrote back, finally, no, we have no evidence. Nothing in writing. And about the FDA itself, they've been accused of many things. The FDA has taken the position enforcing the FDAA. It's another sub-agency that looks over some of these clinical trials. In fact, the FDA and the NIH have said that determining whether clinical trials and trial sponsors are in or out of compliance with the FDAA is a discretionary task. A task that they have chosen not to do in some of these cases, and some of these medicines, and some of these vaccines. So they've kind of went through and got through the having to prove efficacy with some of this stuff, because it's discretionary, except when it comes to silver. As a result, the unwillingness of the FDA and NIH to enforce the law, drug companies, device makers, universities, and other trial sponsors have come to expect that they can withhold the results from clinicaltrials.gov with impunity. Without enforcement, the clinicaltrials.gov database will remain incomplete, and the purpose of the FDAA, which is to vet the studies, will go unfulfilled. Without enforcement, Americans are at greater risk of wasting money on useless medical products and being injured by unsafe ones. If the FDA and NIH prove unequal to the task, Congress will have to take steps in order to force the agency's hand and start producing that stuff that just discretionary they ask for. So if I want to save 1 million lives with colloidal silver, humic acid, and vitamin C, they may ask me for my clinical trials. But yet, if I want to produce a vaccine, it's discretionary on whether or not they even look at the clinical trials. That leads to allegations of unsafe drugs that are approved. Some critics believe the FDA has been apt to overlook safety concerns. Well, no kidding, when it's just discretionary, and approving new drugs, and is slow in withdrawing approved drugs once evidence shows them to be unsafe. Regulin and Vioxx are two high-profile examples of drugs approved by the FDA, which were later withdrawn from the market for posing unacceptable risks to patients. Now, Vioxx is still available, but it comes with a bunch of red tape in order to get it. And then that other stuff, the Regulin, is a diabetic drug that was also available abroad at the time the FDA approved it. Post-marketing safety data indicated that the drug had dangerous side effects, in this case, liver failure. And liver failure is a common side effect to many medications if you overdose or stay on them too long. The liver failure equation is so important, and that's how they actually determine therapeutic dose. It's you have to give your body more medication than your liver can break down in order to sustain a therapeutic level. The drug was pulled off the market, this drug about for diabetes, in the UK in 1997, but was not withdrawn by the FDA until 2000. So 3 years went by before the time it claimed that thousands of Americans were injured or even killed by the drug. In the case of Vioxx, a pre-approval study indicated that a group taking the drug had 4 times the risk of heart attacks. I mean, it was part of the study. When somebody actually looked at it, somebody actually looked back in the old days, they actually did look at these studies and compared to another group of patients taking another anti-inflammatory called naproxen. So you were 4 times more likely to have a heart attack over the people taking naproxen. And I got to believe it was the naproxen people going, hey, look at this. Well, what do? The FDA approval board accepted the manufacturer's argument. It was just an argument. They didn't have a whole lot of study. It was just an excuse that this discrepancy, this 4 times greater risk of heart attack, was because there was a previously unknown cardioprotective effect of naproxen. Naproxen was protecting just normal people from having heart attacks. Therefore, it made the Vioxx people, their heart attack rates look higher than naproxen's. It had nothing to do that Vioxx was a risk. And so the FDA goes, that sounds good. And the drug was approved in 2005. The results of a randomized placebo-controlled study showed that Vioxx users suffered a higher rate of heart attack and other cardiovascular disorders, not just heart attack, than patients taking no medication at all. So they had to compare to people not even on naproxen now. And we saw that Vioxx was harmful to the cardiovascular system. But Merck is one of the largest pharmaceuticals on the world. They print what's called the Merck Manual, and that is the holy Bible of medicine. The manufacturer Merck withdrew the drug after disclosures that it had withheld information about its risks from doctors and patients for over 5 years, resulting in between, get this, 88,000 and 140,000 cases of serious heart disease, of which roughly half of those people died. So they killed people, who had sore joints. They killed about 100,000 people. Okay, and now they're going to make a vaccine for you, these people. And the FDA is going to approve it and tell you it is safe. And it's probably going to become mandatory. They're going to do everything in their power to get you vaccinated. And, once 70% of the population is vaccinated, you've pretty much shut down the pandemic. It doesn't require you to have 100% of the people vaccinated. But if there's 10 people that aren't vaccinated, what? They're not a risk. Everybody's been vaccinated. So, but those 10 people still got to get vaccinated. They might eat a snake that ate a bat that had coronavirus. So, and then the NIH They have a role in all of this. Dr. Fauci is like the biggest player on the planet when it comes to coronavirus. Mr. Contradiction, Mr. Oh yeah, I did lie, but I had a good reason. Yeah, we're going to listen to him again and wonder if he's lying again. But patients who took part in a previous U.S. National Institute of Health study had no idea that these people in the NIH were getting thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in royalty payments and might benefit financially from the use of their discoveries by pharmaceutical companies and device makers. A report from the Associated Press does allege this. This information was not made public until the press agency obtained the information after what? Filing a request under the Freedom of Information Act. Then they found out that all of these guys in the NIH were putting themselves down as inventors and getting royalties. But the royalties belong to the U.S. citizens. The royalties belong to the U.S. government. It does not belong to Dr. Fauci and all of his little clan that he's got running around there in Creepville. At the same time, NIH researchers spent millions of taxpayers' dollars studying the treatments that they developed that were licensed to drug companies, where that's where the money came from in the first place. The U.S. government owns the patents on this stuff. Fauci doesn't own the patents. He's listed as inventor. And then they licensed it to the company, and then the inventor goes, well, I invented it. So the drug companies pay them a royalty. So I'm hoping the U.S. government gets some of that money, because they're sure handing it out left and right and printing it as fast as the printing presses can run. A patient advocacy group, the Alliance for Human Research Protection, says the patients might have thought differently about the risks they were facing when they knew that there was a financial stake at risk. When the guy told you this isn't going to hurt you, is actually making $150,000 in royalties, then you might change the way you look at things. And then there's the whistleblower from Elmhurst saying that if you were on government subsistence, if you were on a government program, they slapped you on a ventilator for any time you said you were short of breath. You went on a ventilator, and they just kept raising the pressure until you died. Can you imagine that? And the ivermectin, people ask, I had made a video about ivermectin, the standards that they're requiring for ivermectin to be approved is they're lower standards than they put on other stuff. So why would they change the measuring stick? Why would they change the goalpost for ivermectin? Ivermectin is a quinone polyphenol that has a lot of different chemical groups attached to it, but it does feature a lot of oxygenated rings, quinones, oxygen. So oxygen's alkaline. Alkaline substances can donate electrons and neutralize positive charges. So that's the whole idea behind most of these medications, like humic acid, which is over-the-counter, silver, over-the-counter, quinine sulfate, over-the-counter, hydrochloroquine, prescription. All of those have been proven to neutralize the spike protein, which carries a high positive charge, an HIV-like protein. And then there's the money trail. Follow the money. U.S. government gave $3.7 million grant to Wuhan lab. They're at the center of this coronavirus mess, okay? But on the U.S. Department of Justice website, they have 3 individuals that have been arrested or have warrants for their arrest. One of them is a professor at Harvard who got $2 million from Wuhan. So look at this. Fauci gives money to Wuhan. Wuhan turns around and gives money back to Harvard, who has a contract with the U.S. Department of Defense. I like it. I like it. And so that leaves Wuhan with an extra surplus $1.7 million to actually research bat coronaviruses, which what? Do not make the furin cleaving protein that is in the human coronavirus. So that virus is not a descendant of any bat coronavirus. Okay? But the money trail. Oh, money makes the world go round. So all of these people in the NIH should be disclosing their financial situation. What stocks are they invested in? We know some of them are invested in Gilead. That's a no-brainer. We know that they're getting royalties from licensing out their inventions. So I discover that I have a treatment for cancer, and one of the Merck says, "Well, we want that. We want to make that. We want it." So then we're like, "Well, we invented it. We can't just give it to you." So the U.S. government says, "Well, we'll license this product, this patent, to you, so you can work with it for 3 years, or 4 years, or 5 years, and make as much of this medication as you can in 5 years." But you have to pay for licenses. You have to pay for that licensing. So then the inventors, which are Dr. Fauci didn't sit in a laboratory and invent anything. He's a paper pusher, okay? And he was not the technician that sat in the lab hunched over test tubes for months at a time, using and making and researching these patents, these glycoproteins. It wasn't him. He received the information. They passed to him the stuff that they found and discovered in the lab, and his name ends up as inventor. So the whole thing stinks. The whole thing stinks. There's a mountain of evidence saying silver's antiviral, and well, you have to prove. We know it's antiviral, they say, but you have to prove it works. Well, if it's not going to hurt you, and it's a state of emergency that you have to take away people's livelihoods and destroy lives to save my life from the coronavirus, which apparently you're doing a really horrible job of doing, then why is the standard so high for silver but not for ivermectin and the monoclonal antibodies? A lot of the proof they're using is in petri dishes and not in living cells. But it's a state of emergency. So the use of the state of emergency is discretionary. The research and counter-checking and balance the studies that are supposed to prove that something's effective and safe, all of that's discretionary. But what's not discretionary is the money, the amount of money that's going around in circles there. So nobody's clean on this. Nobody comes out unscathed on this issue. And then there's another money trail. There's the $3.7 million given by our government, our NIH and Dr. Fauci, to the Wuhan Institute, the center of all this controversy, and to study what? The coronavirus in bats. They're going to try to do something with coronavirus, which is not the same coronavirus that's affecting the entire globe right now. That $3.7 million made it to Wuhan, and $2 million made it back to a professor at Harvard. The Harvard professor, Dr. Charles Lieber, he's on one of the pages of the Department of Justice website. Yet nobody wants to talk about it. Of course, Harvard Chemical Biology Department had a couple different contracts with the Department of Defense. So when we give $3.7 million to Wuhan. Wuhan comes back and bribes a chemical biology department head with $2 million. Wuhan employees were caught smuggling biological samples out of the United States. That's on the Department of Justice website as well. So the money trail is sickening. But what is more sickening is the lack of conversation and the lack of attention being devoted to that aspect of this global crisis. This is why people strongly believe that this coronavirus is part of an overall agenda to facilitate what's called Agenda 21, which is an agenda of control and authoritarian control of the people of the entire world. That's a conspiracy theory, but you have to remember, a conspiracy theory is born out of a single fact. And then people draw conclusions from that single fact, theories. But as you gather more and more information, it's no longer a theory, but a probability. And until next time, keep your ear to the ground and your eyes wide open.